Hello, everybody. The boys are back to break down UFC Vegas 108, Tatsuro Taira versus Hyun Sung Park. We're going to go through that main card. Today, I'm joined by not San. San's actually not here, by Luke and Ryan. Minus San is what I meant to say. But before we get into it, we're going to talk about some recent fight news. Some big fights were announced. But even before we do that, Ryan, Luke, how are we doing tonight, boys?
Doing good.
Doing good. I think we clean swept last weekend.
Yeah, that was big.
I mean, a little bit of a heater.
I was going to say, before we get into some of the recent fight news that drops, going 5 for 5 for the three amigos right here felt pretty damn good. I'll tell you that. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, we were getting a little nervous there. I almost was at 500. I was like, this is bad. So glad to turn the ship, right the ship.
And you know what? Let's carry it into this week and fucking put up some big numbers, boys. I'm pumped up to get into this card. But even before we do, some of the fight news that has been announced. Aaron Pico versus Lerone Murphy just got announced to be the co-main for UFC 319. I know they had that co-main spot vacant there. To be honest, I'm not in the best position to really talk too much on early prediction-wise for Aaron Pico versus Lerone Murphy. I haven't dug into it too much. It's very fresh, and I'm not the most well-versed as far as Aaron Pico goes. I know his grappling credentials and his NCAA wrestling credentials are there. And he's an absolute stud. I know he's done some stuff on the world scene as well, especially before going into like the men's freestyle and whatnot, but more so 18 below. I know growing up he was like the same era as Bo Nickel wrestling wise, and apparently as far as his freestyle credentials went, he was always kind of a step ahead of Bo Nickel there, where he was getting like U18 golds, Bo Nickel was not. So I mean, let's see. It's a big signing for the UFC, and I'm excited for Aaron Pico to make his debut. I don't know if you guys have too much more to add there.
Right, you got it.
Nah, I mean, I guess just definitely a more favorable matchup to make your UFC debut. Still a tough one in Lerone Murphy, but definitely a lot better than stepping up against Movsar Evloev, who at this point I think I'd rather see him fight for a title. I know he pulled out, but it's either that or Yair Rodriguez. And like I said, at this stage, Movsar has done more to earn the title than Yair has. You know, he's undefeated in the UFC. He's on like a 9-fight win streak. Biggest win streak for featherweights right now. Give the man his title shot. We can put this to rest. Let Volk face some new blood, and we'll see what Aaron Pico does in his UFC debut. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think that's well said there. I will say I think the Aaron Pico versus Movsar fight would have been kind of fun as far as the wrestling goes, just to see who the better wrestler is. Is it the Russian? Is it the American? But I guess no point of really talking about what if since it's not happening. But
you know, yeah, he's as good as they say they are. He'll fight him eventually. You know what I mean? Let him grow, let him get into some UFC competition, and then give him the dogs.
Yeah, I think I really liked what you guys both said. In terms of more favorable matchup for Aaron Pico, definitely I think Movsar, Ryan, you hit on it. I think he deserves a title shot. If you like him or not, you know, you got to tip the cap to the performances that he's put on in the UFC. And Zach, kind of like you said, I'm not too familiar with Aaron Pico, but I do work with a couple collegiate wrestlers who had him favored against Movsar going into that fight when we were talking about it the other day. They regarded him as, you know, one of the highest level wrestlers there is, you know, up and coming through the American, you know, I don't know if you want to call it a circuit, just the wrestling scene. They heard about him. And then they said he kind of just stopped in terms of following that natural collegiate path. I don't think he went to college to wrestle. I could be wrong. But I don't remember him. So I'm super excited to see how good he is. Obviously, guys from that background have talked very highly. And, you know, Lerone Murphy is no pushover, but I definitely think it's an easier matchup for him.
Yeah, agreed. And then there was some big news dropped as far as UFC 320, and the first of which being, we'll start from bottom up, and the first being Jiri Procházka versus Khalil Rountree, which is an absolute banger. Rountree and Jiri both just beat up Jamal Hill, so they have Jamal Hill's two dads here set to face off, which should be a fun one, man. Stylistically, it's going to be a banger. You have just a very unorthodox striker as far as Jiri Procházka goes, opposing the Muay Thai of Khalil Rountree. I think that'll be absolute fireworks, and I'm not even too sure who I favor here, to be completely honest. But Luke, I'd like to hear your opinions on who you're favoring early and what your thoughts are going into this matchup.
Yeah, this is a tough one to call early, so I'm not going to make a bold prediction this far out. But I don't know if anyone's been able to listen to Khalil Rountree on Rogan. Just one of those guys, like, just seems so down to earth. Great conversation about his preparation. Not only for the Pereira fight and his mindset in that one, but also his mindset going into the Jamal Hill fight and his supreme confidence that he just knew he was going to win that fight. He literally called him out, said, "You're not even going to make me bleed," and he put a dominant performance. But the one thing I wanted to call out that they talked about a lot on the pod is both Jiri and Khalil, after fighting Alex, have jumped so significantly in terms of, like, that next fight. They look so much better. Obviously, Alex Pereira, one of the best we've seen over the last 10 years. But I'm really excited for this fight. I think it's two guys who, learned a lot. Obviously, MMA Math Khalil lasted a lot longer, probably won round 1 and 2 against Alex, where Jiri, was out of there early. But yeah, just the styles, I think they match up really well for, a really interesting fight. And I think Yuri's, like, technical advances since the Alex fight that we saw against Jamal Hill, I really want to see how far he's came, because there's really no more technical strikers than the Muay Thai of Khalil Rountree in that division. So yeah, super excited for that one.
Yeah, Luke, you pretty much nailed it. I don't have any early predictions for this one either. I mean, it's an exciting fight. I'm, just pumped that this got announced. I guess the only thing I will say is, in terms of, I guess I'd give the slight nod to Khalil at this point. Like you said, Luke, 1-2 rounds against Pereira, that means nothing. I mean, they both lost to the guy, but I think it just shows in terms of when Procházka is dealing with a very, much more technical striker, he tends, to lose those fights, look sloppy in those fights. And I do give the nod in technicality to Khalil here. So maybe slight lean towards Khalil, but we all saw what he just did to Jamal Hill, which is nothing short of a masterclass as well. So exciting fight.
Yeah, I think that was well said by both of you. And like I said, I don't really have too much of an early prediction on this one, but early prediction, I would also favor Khalil Rountree. Again, I agree with what you said as far as the technicalities go there, Ryan, and I also think Khalil is a little bit more defensively sound. I think Yuri's, it's just a hands down kind of thing, head swinging, and with that Muay Thai Khalil Rountree, one big strike, and could be nights out for Jiri Procházka, but I guess that could go both ways. I know Jiri has a ton of power, but yeah, I'd agree and give the early nods to Khalil.
I guess it's still hard to say. I mean, people forget that Jiri can grapple, so if he decides to shoot the takedown, sub over, decides to shoot a takedown, push Khalil up against the cage, there could be some trouble there, but we'll see what he does. You never know what you're going to get out of a Jiri Procházka fight until you're actually watching it. So we'll see.
Yeah, well said. And moving on to the co-main at UFC 320, we got my guy Cory Sandhagen taking on the probably early pick to be fighter of the year, Merab Dvalishvili. And I will say, before we say anything, earlier this year we had a nice podcast where we talked about who could be holding the belt come the end of 2025. And my bold prediction was Cory Sandhagen. And thus far, about everything I said has come true, and that wasn't too much. It's really that he'd beat Davison Figueiredo, and then he'd be in line to get that title shot next, just because he's fresh blood, and Merab needs fresh blood there. But one thing I will say, while I do favor Merab early, I think it's almost impossible to pick against Merab right now. I will say Cory Sandhagen poses some threats that I don't think Merab has faced yet. I think Cory's a bit more of a dynamic striker than Umar. I know Umar's a very dynamic striker, don't get me wrong here, but Cory has those flying knees up the middle. He has those elbows. Very dangerous there as far as Merab's entries goes. And I also think Cory has a better jiu-jitsu game than Umar, where you can put him in some weird positions. I know Cory loves that 50-50 position, and you put Merab somewhere weird, you pop his knee, there you go. I think there are some threats there that Merab hasn't seen, but with that being said, it is just so damn hard to pick against Merab Dvalishvili. But Ryan, I'll pass the baton over to you, and I want to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think if I have to lean anything, I have to lean Merab here. I mean, you talk about like the 50-50 jiu-jitsu. He's been working with like Ryan Hall and whatnot. Cory Sandhagen has at least, and it's just like, it wouldn't surprise me if Cory Sandhagen were to pop Merab's knee and then he were to still fight like a machine for the next 2, 3, 4 rounds, what have you. After that, I mean, the guy's just an animal, and it's like the pace that he pushes on people. It's like you haven't seen that level of cardio, and I don't know if Cory Sandhagen can, he maybe shocks throw and can hang with that level of pace for 25 minutes, but at this point, we haven't seen anyone be able to do it. Umar Nurmagomedov was the big test. those guys, relentlessly train cardio every single day up in the mountains at high elevation for their entire lives. And Merab just worked him over and pushed him to his absolute limits after round 3. And then, he just ran away with the fight, and he's done that to everyone he's faced since Ricky Simon. So at this point, I still have to give the edge to Merab here. It's one of those guys who's reaching that territory ball. You're not going to, until someone beats him, I can't pick against him type of deal, at this stage. Although I do love Cory, and I hope your prediction comes true, Zach. It would be a good one. Still got to lean Merab here.
Yeah, I think you guys hit on great points with Merab. Obviously, we're witnessing, probably the best to ever do it in the division. Just running through everyone. Best cardio the UFC has seen. It's been amazing to watch. So yeah, it's going to be a great fight. I think, I like Cory. I'm not going to pick Cory right now. I think obviously the smart pick's Merab. Cory seems to always be right there and comes up a little bit short against Jan, against Umar, like you guys touched on. But yeah, this might be his last shot. He's getting older in the division. Yeah, he beats the guys he should beat, and he always seems to really compete against the best of the division, the top 3 or 4. But you never know, when the division rotates over, when you are in line to get that next title shot, especially if he drops one to a contender like he has done in the past. So I think that's something I'm looking forward to seeing a Cory Sandhagen, with no retreat, burn the ships and kind of see that approach. One thing that I do really like about Cory Sandhagen's game, other than the jiu-jitsu, you good, Rye? Other than the jiu-jitsu is I really like the knees up the middle from Cory. I think, that could be a huge, aspect of his game against Merab. Definitely an aspect of the game plan coming in. The dude hits hard. He's unorthodox in some of his strikes, and like you guys said, he's gotten so significantly better at grappling, wrestling in particular, and that jiu-jitsu's always kind of been there. So I do think it's another test for Merab. I don't think this is, as much as I hate to say this, of being a sugar guy, but I think this is way lower, I guess, less favorable for Merab than the second sugar fight. So I think this is another challenge for Merab, and we either see another level of his, reign as a champion, or we see maybe someone really push him for 5 rounds. So we'll see. I'm excited for this fight. This is a great fight.
Yeah, and one more thing to touch on there that I forgot to mention, it's just Cory Sandhagen's ability to scramble is up there with the best of them. We saw it with Umar. He's just constantly Granby rolling, putting people in weird positions. He always works back up to his feet. That's something that Sugar doesn't really possess. It seems kind of like when Sugar got taken down, it's it's a little bit more of a struggle to get back up. But one thing that also does favor Merab here, in my opinion, is this fight's in 8 weeks. That's a very short turnaround. Just in general, that's a very quick, okay, we're fighting in 8 weeks. Here you go. I know Cory Sandhagen was about to go on vacation to Hawaii. I don't know if that happened or not. And I think just knowing Merab's cardio, that has to favor him a little bit. But Cory's always training, so I don't think that's really too big of a factor. But it's kind of something to throw out there. But moving on to the main event of UFC 320, we have the rematch between Magomed Ankalaev and Alex Pereira. I know it's kind of been confirmed in their last fight that Alex Pereira had the injured hand and had norovirus or something like that. So hopefully he's coming in here completely healthy, not traveling the world and whatnot. So I'm hoping for a different fight. But with that being said, now you have Ankalaev as the champion. He has an extra 20% boost as the champion, like we like to talk about. So it's interesting here. And Luke, I'll let you kind of kick this one off. Do you see this fight going much different than their first fight?
100%. I feel like after Alex Pereira has lost, it's only been now twice in the UFC, one to Izzy, right, and then the most recent one to Ankalaev. I think there's something that lights a fire in him. Not that he gets complacent, but I feel like when you're knocking dudes out, lining them up, knocking them down, like you said, traveling the world, taking all these fights on short notice, you forget that feeling to lose, and I think it really affects a guy like that, a champion of that level. So him back on the grind. I know he got put on some muscle. He was weighing 240, which obviously he probably weighs around there normally, but he looked big. He's been training hard, fully healthy. I'm going Alex all day. It doesn't even matter who he's fighting at this point in his career. He's the most entertaining, knockout artist that we've seen in a while. So, he's my pick for sure. But I will say on the counter side, Ankalaev has felt Alex's power. I don't know if with the Nova virus and the hurt hand, if maybe he has a misconception of the power. So that's definitely something to look out for. Obviously, hopefully Alex has been grappling heavy, kind of knowing after he lost that fight that this would be the match to make, the rematch. But one thing I'll say, obviously, you talked about how you get that 20% better as a champ. I also think it's a huge advantage for a wrestler versus, a non-grappler. When you are the champion, you have to beat the champ. I think it's easier to control rounds, easier to get on the judges' scorecard with wrestling sometimes. So that's definitely something to look out for. But I don't think this one goes the distance at all. I think both guys, have a bad taste in their mouth. Obviously not Ankalaev, but I think he's upset with some of the things Alex said about the victory. So I'm expecting this one to be, under 3 rounds, under 4 rounds. So I'm looking forward to this for sure.
Yeah, Luke, I love everything you just said. I think just to touch on that a little bit is I'm going Pereira as well here, just because, like you, Zach, said, neurovirus, broken hand. And one thing to note about that fight is I don't think it ever went to the ground. And maybe, for like 30 seconds or something. I remember Alex got a trip at the end of one of the rounds on Ankalaev. And I think even though he lost the belt that night, it does build your confidence as you work on your grappling after fighting him for the first time. Also knowing that he wasn't able to get you to the ground for 25 minutes in that first fight with a broken hand and with neurovirus, which suppresses your power. You can't hit as hard. If he comes into this one healthy and is able to keep it on the feet, like you said, Luke, 2, 3, maybe 1 round, and this fight's done.
Yeah, I kind of hate to say it. My early pick is going to be Magomed Ankalaev. I like the control aspects of it. We saw it kind of even last Saturday between Ranier de Ridder and Robert Whittaker, where that fight was really won based off of who was on the front foot, who was controlling the octagon, a lot of control time against the cage. And I could see that being a factor here. Then you have the confidence of being the champ. I think it's a lot to overcome for Alex Pereira, but it's very difficult to pick against the guy. We can end the fight at any moment, and I'm really hoping we see a different Alex Pereira in this rematch, and I'm really hoping that left hook connects and he puts Magomed Ankalaev out. But my early prediction is going to be Big Ank, unfortunately. And moving on to our next fight announcement, UFC 321, Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane has been announced. This will be Aspinall's first defense as the undisputed heavyweight champ, taking on a guy who is now getting his 3rd crack at the UFC heavyweight belt in his last 4 fights, I believe. I believe you went Francis Ngannou to John Jones, then fought I don't know why I'm blanking on the name here. He fought
Volkov.
Yeah, Volkov in that controversial split decision win, and now gets another crack here against Tom Aspinall. And I do think Cyril Gane does pose something a little different for Tom Aspinall, just as far as his game on the feet goes. I think he can kind of prolong fights a little bit on the feet. He has very quick footwork. I don't know if Aspinall would just blitz in and put him out early. And I think Aspinall will have to get his grappling involved here. But Ryan, I'll toss this one over to you to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, I think for a guy who struggles in the wrestling department, especially, which is what gave Francis Ngannou the nod over him in that title fight, and then to fight John Jones for a title where you just saw, he got put up against the cage, taken down, and then put in that guillotine like within 2.5 minutes. I don't see this fight with Tom Aspinall going any different. He's very well-rounded. He's explosive on the feet. He's faster than any other heavyweight in that division with the power to match it. And I think Tom's just going to continue that streak of just putting these guys out in round 1. I think he just blast double legs them, gets them on the ground, maybe ground and pound TKOs him or submits him within the first 2.5 minutes of this fight.
Yeah, right. I'm right there with you. Yeah, I don't see really any path to victory other than a crazy knockout from Cyril Gane, which we haven't really seen as of recent from him. I think, when you get a guy who, like you guys both touched on, his biggest concern is the grappling versus Tom Aspinall, who we've seen do some crazy stuff on the ground, with that one arm bar. Like he's just good everywhere. And like you said, Cyril Gane's definitely quick and something that Tom Aspinall hasn't seen, at that level yet, but Tom Aspinall's quick. So two great athletes to fight for this belt. I think Tom Aspinall gets his hand raised, and I agree with you, Ryan. I think he gets it out of here in the first. I think the question still is like how invested is Cyril Gane really in this? This is his 3rd shot at the title. If he doesn't win this, I don't know. Does he continue to fight? But it's good to see Tom finally get the recognition he deserves at the undisputed. So happy to see him with the the real belt, so to say.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go with Tom Aspinall too as my early prediction. I think just the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu will be too much here for Cyril Gahn. I don't see this fight going too much differently than the John Jones fight did for Cyril Gahn. I just think he just has too big of a deficiency in the grappling department, and Tom Aspinall will get him out of there probably round one via sub. But moving on to our last bit of fight news, Carlos Ulberg versus Dominic Reyes has just been announced for the main event of UFC Perth. And I guess I'll kick this one off with my early prediction. I'm going to go with the youth and Carlos Ulberg in front of his home crowd. I think, although Dominic Reyes has been on a very nice run recently, you look at who it's against, and it's against a bunch of guys who are pretty chinny and old. And you flip the coin here against Carlos Ulberg, and he's not chinny nor old. And I think that kind of says enough in front of the home crowd. They're probably putting him in a position to pick up a win here and really propel himself into that title contention. But with all that being said, Luke, I'll let you take the floor from here.
Yeah, excuse me. I agree with everything that you said. I'm favoring Ulberg early. Kind of sucks because I'm kind of loving the resurgence of Dom Reyes, but I think this is just a little bit too much, too big of a bite to chew. Ulberg in front of his hometown fans, he packs a punch. I think that chin that has plagued Dom Reyes over the last 5 years, but more so the front end of that 3 years out of the 5 is going to come back here. I see Ulberg getting him out of there, especially as a main event 5-rounder. But we'll see. Dom Reyes, he's been in there with John Jones. Very, very competitive fight with John Jones. So you never know what Dom Reyes you're going to get. So I think it's going to be a good fight. I'm very excited for that one.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I mean, early nod probably has to go to Ulberg, but I just love the fairy tale run that Dominic Reyes is on, and I want it to continue, so I'm rooting for the guy.
Yeah, definitely. And on to UFC Vegas 108, on to the main card here. It gets kicked off between a fight between two prospects here. We have Danny Silva taking on Kevin Vallejos. Vallejos is the early, like, minus 450 favorite opposing Danny Silva. And a couple things to really touch on here. Both guys have been very impressive thus far in their UFC tenure. Kevin Vallejos really kicked it off a few years ago, taking on Gene Silva in the Contender Series, a fight in which, believe it or not, he was the favorite in. Went out, took round 1 against Gene Silva, dropped rounds 2 and 3, did not get the UFC contract. Fast forward a season later, puts on a very impressive performance in which he found a knockout against Cam Teague. And then fast forward a few months later from there, he found another impressive knockout in his UFC debut, one in which Around the Octagon was all over. We put him out by round 1 knockout in that fight, in which it did happen. On the flip side of that, you have Danny Silva, who also is a Dana White Contender Series alum. He fought Angel Pacheco and really just had a pretty crazy fight there in his Contender Series fight. I think he landed like 206 strikes or something like absolutely insane. That might be an exaggeration. It might have been like one and change. It might have even been 200 to be completely honest. Both guys landed crazy volumes, and now he's on a 2-fight win streak within the UFC. His debut against Josh Kulabau, he was an underdog, found the split decision win there. Fast forward a few months later, Lucas Almeida, another split decision win there. I know that one was a little bit more controversial. But I guess where I was going with all that is you usually don't see two kind of undefeated prospects really match up like this. And it should be a very entertaining fight. And I think the line here at minus 450 for Kevin Vallejos is a bit bullish, in my opinion. But he is one of my favorite prospects in the UFC. I'm very excited to see him fight. With that being said, Ryan, the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, I'm going Vallejos in this one, and it's like everything you just touched on, Zach. I mean, he had Danny Silva had an absolute war. It's probably one of the best fights, I'd say, on Dana White Contender Series. He fought Angel Pacheco, and I just looked at the stats, and this will go into my point further, but he landed 204 significant strikes on Angel Pacheco, and Angel Pacheco landed 197 significant strikes on him. And that concerns me because what you see in Danny Silva's career, especially these last two split decisions, is while, his output's crazy, it's like 7 significant strikes per minute, the guy also gets hit a lot. And with the guy with the power of Kevin Vallejos, I don't see him being able to take those hits, that defense for 15 minutes. So I give the nod here. Even if it goes to a decision, I think Vallejos is going to be landing the more significant shots, in each round, the more powerful shots, because the power edge does go to him. And I think he'll comfortably be able to slide his way into a victory with this one.
Yeah, I'm going to make that a clean sweep. I think you guys really hit on everything. I'm going Vallejos here as well. Yeah, I really just look at Danny Silva's, the 2 fights in the UFC after he won that Contender Series fight, split decision. Obviously, the second one controversial. He's definitely a great prospect, 10-1, something to look out for going forward. I think he's just run into a brick wall here in Vallejos. You're looking at, he lost to Gene Silva decision and then 4 straight finishes, 3 by knockout, 1 by rear naked choke in another company. And then, like you said, Contender Series and UFC knockouts. I think it just sucks that, Danny Silva's getting this matchup. It's going to be a good fight, but I think, Vallejos is just a little bit smoother. Like you said, Rye, he just hits with a little bit more power. And I truly think he's, a prospect to watch. This is a guy up and coming that we should all be keeping an eye on. And on the flip side, I think Danny Silva's here to stay. I think he's going to be around for a while. And, you never know, an early fight like this, an early loss to another prospect, could propel your career. You could learn a lot from this. So I think both guys are in a good spot here. But I'm taking the nod on Vallejos here by knockout.
Yeah, and I really like the point you made there, Ryan, about Danny Silva getting hit. It seems like he's more of a volume striker. I know he does have some pop there, but the power is not going to match up with the power of Kevin Vallejos. And I think that's just a very dangerous game to play with a guy like Kevin Vallejos. He's pressing forward. He's not scared to get hit. And I don't think this is a guy you want to take too many big strikes from. So, yeah, I'm also on Vallejos, and I could see a knockout as well. Might put that out as a play of mine. Not too sure yet. Got to do a little bit more digging, but I like Kevin Vallejos here. And moving on, we have a welterweight bout between 2 UFC veterans. We have Neil Magny taking on Zaleski dos Santos. And I do very much like the matchmaking here. And I think it's about time that Neil Magny gets matched up with someone around his age, because recently he's gotten matched up with the likes of Ian Gary, Michael Morales, and Carlos Prates, 3 hot commodities in that welterweight division. So it's a nice change of pace here, taking on Zaleski dos Santos. But Zaleski dos Santos still does have power, and Neil Magny has had some pretty bad finishes recently. So I wonder how that's going to translate here. But with that being said, Ryan, I'll let you take the floor from here.
Luke, you got it.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. The biggest concern for me is I'm taking Magny to start it off. I think the biggest concern is Zaleski's power, man. Like, he hits hard. He's got pretty good boxing. And I think that's totally a concern going in against Neil Magny, who we've seen take some pretty brutal beatings in his last 4 or 5 fights. But if you just, like you said, you look at the last 4 guys he fought, he lost to Ian Machado Gary. Arguably could fight for the belt. You could give him that title shot, or an elimination fight. That's a top 15 fighter. Mike Mallet, who we saw Neil Magny get that done at the end. Mallet was beating him. Majority of that fight would have if it went to the scorecards, he gets his hand raised. But he's a top prospect too. Guy still coming up. Then Michael Morales and Carlos Prates, 2 guys in the top 15 as well. So the UFC has not done any favors for Neil Magny. Obviously, he's older in his career. They're still trying to keep him, relevant at the top of the division. But like you said, Zach, I think this is a great fight for him to kind of get back in that win column. When I just look at the statistics here, or the attributes, 6'3" to 5'11" in favor of Magny, and 80-inch reach to 73-inch reach in favor of Magny. Zaleski, who he's had problems with, he lost to Randy Brown, similar build to Neil Magny. Lost to Chidi, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, but also similar build to Neil Magny. So we've seen guys of this build give him problems. I think the question is, can Neil Magny's chin hold up? We've seen him get beat up recently. He's up there in age. So that's my biggest concern going in. But I think Neil Magny, he has the experience in the octagon, fought in better competition, and he's due for a win here. So I'm going Neil Magny. I think it goes to decision. I got him UD.
Yeah, Luke, I agree with you. I think the 80-inch reach to 7-inch reach advantage pretty much sold me on this one for this fight. For me, it comes down to Neil Magny having that length, and that reach over to just work the jab and then find his way up against the cage, maybe get some takedowns. And I think he's going to play this one a lot smarter, knowing that he's been knocked out twice in the last 12 months, and Ian Gary almost had him out with leg kicks when they fought. I think it's going to be similar to his Mike Mallet fight, where he finally just gets that control on the ground and maybe doesn't find a finish the way he needed one in round 3 of that fight, but is able to coast his way to a decision.
Yeah, and that's going to make a clean sweep here on an underdog. I am also siding with Neil Magny here. Right now I'm seeing him at plus 180, and I think that's just kind of a ridiculous line here. I have this more as a toss-up. And before I even get into reasoning or anything, something that I found funny today, I was listening to Anna Florian podcast on my way to work, and they were just cracking up about Zaleski dos Santos' nickname, and it's Capoeira. And they're like, dude, really? Like, how is that your nickname? It's like you're just going to throw a fighting style as your nickname, kind of funny. But even beside that, that capoeira style at age 38, about to be 39, is a bit weird if you really think about what that style relies on. It's a lot of speed and whatnot, and as you age, I don't know if that's necessarily still going to be there. But I do like the Neil Magny by decision. I think Neil Magny will be able to get that jab going, pump that jab, and when he's able to, he does seem to have success. And with holding such a big reach advantage, I think he will be able to do so. But Zaleski definitely holds the ability to finish the fight on his feet with his power and on the ground with his jiu-jitsu. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. And I don't know if you can even take this as a bet, but I like the Neil Magny by decision or Zaleski by finish kind of outlook on it. But we shall see come Saturday night, as Max Holloway would say. But I am also going with Neil Magny here. And moving on, we have a women's bantamweight bout between Carol Rosa and Nora Cornolle. This is one that I actually have been struggling with all week. I'm not really too sold on Carol Rosa here. She had a lot of success in her fight against Penny. I'm going to struggle pronouncing the last name here, Kianzad, where her opponent kind of just stood there and got punched and didn't have much movement and whatnot, and she landed a boatload of significant strikes. Then you fast forward in her fight against Aline Perez, who did move, and Aline Perez is no killer by any means, who just had some movement, and she really struggled there on the feet. And Nora Cornolle is a very weird fighter. I've heard the comparison to being kind of like a woman's DDP with just how awkward her fight style is and her striking and that kind of like brawler's mentality. And I think that kind of physicality and whatnot can pose some problems for Carol Rosa. So my early pick here, I'll just kick us off here. I am going to go with the underdog, Nora Cornolle here at plus 140. And with all that being said, Luke, I'm going to pass the baton over to you and let you take it from here.
Yeah, I'm going Nora as well. I think it's pretty simple for me. It's just the power. I think Carol Rosa definitely, she's a decent striker. Her stand-up's pretty good, but the power of Nora, I think, at the end of the fight, Carol might lead in total strikes landed, but the power is what's going to sway the judges on the scorecards. Nora can crack, and she continues to get better. It seems like every fight. Obviously, there is a discrepancy in opponents to this point in their careers. Not favoring Nora. I just think, at the end of the day with women's fights, I feel like when we watch them, it's whoever's head snapping back more because they tend to go to decision, normally gets the hand raised. And I do think Nora's also improving in her grappling. I think that could play into factor here, and I think she might have a slight advantage. She's definitely been getting better fight after fight. So yeah, I think this is good, good money on the underdog here. I'm going to take this, but definitely a fight that's, it's close odds for a reason. So if you're looking for a huge parlay piece, this is probably not the one.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be making that a clean sweep. I am also going with the underdog. So that's 2 in a row now for all of us. Like you guys touched on, like you mentioned specifically, I just think the pressure of Nora Cornolle or Cornolle, whatever the fuck you say her name, is going to be the difference here, especially in terms of the judges. Like, this girl goes to finish fights. That's what she does. 9 wins, 8 of them by finish, 6 by TKO, KO, and then 2 by sub. So I just see her putting the pressure on this entire 15 minutes, gunning for a KO. And unless she gets taken down and held down, which I don't see happening, she should be able to at least edge this one out on the judges' scorecards or find a finish.
Yeah, the boys here all taking 2 straight underdogs. That is not something we see too often, but hey, man, hopefully we find some luck here and cashing on some underdogs. But moving on, we have a very fun lightweight bout here between Elvis Brenner and Esteban Ribovics. Ribovics is coming in at about a 3-1 favorite here, which again is a pretty big line here. I know Ribovics has really, ever since that decision win at the Sphere against Daniel Zellhuber, I think a lot of people have been very high on Esteban Ribovics. And then his last matchup against Narsat Akbarast, he lost that very controversial split decision, one in which I thought he won. And one thing to kind of point out about Esteban Ribovics is his takedown defense really lacks at this point in his career. He got taken down multiple times by Hack Press, and then I know earlier in his career, I forget who he was fighting, he got taken down another he got taken down like a handful or so times. But with that being said, he is able to always work back up to his feet. He puts himself in good positions, never really in too much danger. And then on the flip side of that coin, Elvis Brenner, who is also a pretty decent fighter, but he's one that I've never really been too high on. And I think his last two fights against Mektabek Orobai and Joel Alvarez have kind of shown some deficiencies in his game. But enough said on my end. Ryan, the floor is yours to talk about this one.
Yeah, I got Esteban Ribovics in this one. I think it's just the speed, the striking, the volume, everything he throws. He's just going to be putting on a pace on Elvis Brenner, who's a guy who you've seen kind of needs to get the KO if he wants to win. And Esteban Ribovics, besides his fight with Daniel Zahuber, who's also, no slouch on the feet, is pretty technically and defensively sound. So I see Esteban Ribovics just having the time of his life for those 15 minutes in this one. I agree with the odds on this. If anything, I think they probably should be a little bit higher. Esteban Ribovics is no joke. His last loss was a controversial split decision. I'm forgetting the name. I'm pretty sure he's from Morocco. He has like a tendency of beating prospects. I'm blanking on the name here, but
it's Narsad Hakpras.
Yes, he and who's no slouch either. I mean, he's had tough fights. He's shown that he can handle tougher competition, and Elvis Brenner has been on a little bit of a skid. And I like the trajectory of Ribovics so far in the UFC, so I'm going Ribovics.
Yep, I'm gonna make another sweep here. I'm going Ribovics as well. I think Brenner could get this done though. Like I'm gonna put that out there to start with. I think it's very clear that if he grapples this fight, he will win this fight. Like you said, Zach, Ribovics has showed like that he not a slouch, but he tends to always hold the disadvantage in the grappling department. The problem is Brenner's a brawler. He wants to throw hands. He wants to get that big KO, like you said, Rye. But if he plays that game, I think he's going to lose, and I think he can get knocked out here. Ribovics, no slouch, looked great against El Hubers, close split decision last fight, but great knockout against Terrence McKinney, who always seems to be a prospect that's talked about, and then loses a couple, and then gets a crazy win. So yeah, I think this one, like you said, Rye, the technicality and the power and the defense here in the striking department just favors Esteban too much here. I see him getting this one done. I'm going to take second round knockout here.
One more thing I kind of want to highlight about Esteban Ribovics, and I've been hearing a few people talk about it, and they say it's a bit strange with Ribovics that he's not the best counter striker. It seems like he's either go, 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 and then when he's getting thrown on, it's kind of like cover up, wait for your opportunity, then back to go, go, go. So I would like to see some progression in that aspect as far as Ribovics. I know he's a young prospect. I think the sky's the limit for the kid, but yeah, I'm also on Ribovics here. I think it's a good matchup and a good way to get him back in the win column here. And moving on, we have another lightweight bout between two American top team teammates, Mateusz Rebecki versus Chris Duncan. Chris Duncan is coming off a big underdog win here against Jordan Vucenic a few months ago. And Mateusz Rebecki is coming off that split decision war victory over Mektabek Orobai. So both guys looking to build on those wins. With that being said, Luke, I want to hear your opinion on this one.
Yeah, this is a tough one because I have a lot of respect for Chris Duncan and Rebecki. Obviously, that Orobai fight was absolutely insane. I think that happened a couple of years ago. I remember watching that. I think we were on Orobai in that fight, so we ended up losing that. But at the same time, you got to tip the cap to an absolute war. I think it always comes down to Chris Duncan. I feel like he always wins the first rounds of fights and then tends to fade and, is susceptible to getting knocked out. And I think that's going to be the path here. I think he's going to look really good in the first. I think the live odds are going to be very much in play in this fight. And then Rebecki is just going to, use that power and use that dog that he's, shown multiple times in the UFC to get the victory here. I think his boxing is just a little bit better. He puts the lights out of a bunch of guys. He hits hard. And, Chris Duncan, although always looks good in the first, tends to get knocked out in fights. He does have, not the greatest chin. So I'm going Rebecki here. I think the line is good. I got it minus 210 on Tapology right now. I think that's where the line should be. And I think we're going to see a great knockout here. Either way, though, I could see Chris Duncan dogging out a victory as an underdog seems to be his little, his thing as of late. So very live fight. I think this has potential to be fight of the night. I think it's going to be a war.
Yeah, Luke, I completely agree with you. I'm on Rebecki as well here. I think he showed a lot of improvements after his first UFC loss to Diego Ferreira, where he gassed out in the third. He put the pace, and then he showed, he improved the cardio. He went to war with Rebecki Orlby and didn't slow down one step in that entire fight. Did everything he needed to do to win. And Rebecki Orlby, another high-level prospect, a great win for Rebecki on his resume. And it's still, not a bad loss for Orlby by any means, but both guys are absolute killers going up in the lightweight division. For me, it just comes down to I see the guy as being overall more well-rounded, 7 wins by sub, 9 wins by KO. The guy can do it anywhere and everywhere. And I expect him to put on another good highlight pace, especially knowing he only has to fight for 15 minutes with the cardio and everything on Chris Duncan, and either find himself a very comfortable decision or a finish win.
One thing I will say, I'm also going to be on Mateusz Rebecki here, so not too controversial thus far for us, but I am curious to see the gas tank of Rebecki as well, because like you touched on there, Ryan, he did really gas out in that Diego Ferreira fight. He was up early, gassed out, got finished in the third round, and then against Rebecki Orlby, while he was able to go that 15 minutes, you could definitely see some fatigue, but in an absolute war like that with the output both those guys put out, you can understand where that fatigue came from. So the gas tank kind of scares me a little bit, but I guess the same could be said for Chris Duncan. But also the fact that Chris Duncan, he's gone out there as a pretty sizable underdog in his last 2 matchups against Vallejos and Jordan Vucenic, and he has pulled both those off by submission, both of those by guillotine. So I do think Chris Duncan is a live dog here, but I do like the power of Mateusz Rebecki, and I am going to side with Rebecki on this one as well. And moving on to the main event, we have Tatsuro Taira taking on Hyun Sung Park, who is taking this fight on short notice. One thing to highlight here, Hyun Sung Park was scheduled to fight Steve Erceg next weekend in a 3-round bout, where Tatsuro Taira has been training for 5 rounds this whole time and is also coming off a 5-round fight against the number 1 contender, or who was the number 1 contender in the division in Brandon Royval, which was also a very close fight, split decision, one in which Tatsuro Taira had a lot of success in, especially in the grappling department. He was able to find the back of Brandon Royval multiple times, but he did kind of wear down a little bit later in the fight, but that experience is key for a young guy like Tatsuro Taira. Ryan, I know you're a big Tatsuro Taira fan, so it's only fitting to let you start us off here with your prediction.
Yeah, I think you know where I'm going with this. I'm going Taira. I mean, I was going to go Taira when he was going to fight Albazi as well. I wasn't too impressed with Albazi's last performance against Brandon Moreno. He was coming off a long layup and everything and had a number of health complications. But for me, Albazi didn't look good in that fight. I also thought Albazi lost to Kai Kara France when they fought in that split decision. I thought it was pretty clear that Kai won, but the judges went the other way and it was in Albazi's favor. But moving on, now he's fighting a new guy, Hyun Sung Park. He was supposed to fight Steve Erceg next weekend. That was going to be a 3-round fight, which, is notable. He hasn't been training for 5. I'm sure the cardio's there, 4 or 5. I guess we'll see, especially with these flyweights who tend to just be cardio machines, pretty much all of them, So I won't question the cardio, but when he fought Brandon Royval, Tatsuro Taira, he was losing in the striking. And then the reason why that went to a split decision is because he was able to mix it up and start the grappling. So for me, that just shows fight IQ. It's like, okay, I know I'm losing in this aspect of a fight. I'm going to switch it up and try to get these next 3 rounds back by grappling. And he was successful. It's why the fight went to a split decision. I thought Brandon Royval was running away with it after the first 2 rounds, but Tatsuro Taira was able to come back and make a name for himself, or a case for himself on the judges' scorecards. And I don't see this fight going any differently. I think 25 minutes, Tatsuro Taira might play down the feet for a round, maybe a round and a half. And then if that's not going his way, he's just going to stick to the grappling, try to find the back, link up a body triangle, do whatever. He's slick on the ground, has good takedown entries, gets good takedowns, works up against the cage. And I think he should be able to grind Hyun Sung Park out to a decision, if not maybe around 4 or 5 sub.
Yeah, right. I'm with you. I'm on Taira here. A lot of props to Park here. Obviously, training for a very formidable opponent in Steve Erceg. Probably Steve Erceg gave the champ Alex Pantoja the best fight he has had since he's gotten the belt. But since then, we saw him get knocked out by Kai Kara France. It hasn't looked as good as that fight when against Pantoja. But that's a big time fight as well. Guy up in the ranks. But this is different because you're jumping a week ahead. You cut your camp a week short, and like you guys both touched on, a 5-rounder. Park's good, man. There's no doubt about it. He's undefeated for a reason. He's getting this fight for a reason. I think he definitely has the power advantage in this fight, but it is at flyweight, so you tend to not see a lot of knockouts at this weight class. And I think the biggest thing is just the level of competition. Taira has faced, like you guys touched on, the Royval, even the Alex Perez fights. Like, he's fought in way higher competition, in my opinion, up to this point in time. Like I touched on, I think Park does have the maybe a little bit slighter boxing advantage. I think he does hit a little bit harder, but he has shown a lot of vulnerability in his boxing where he does get hit a lot up the middle. He's always live with those hooks. That tends to be where his power shows the most. And he's decent on the ground. He has some submissions in the UFC. But I think Taira definitely holds the grappling advantage. And I also think he holds the speed advantage here. I think if he stays behind that jab and, splits the guard, he could have a lot of success on the feet here, with just adding up volume. And I think once it gets to the ground, he's going to show why he's the better grappler in this fight. And like you guys said, he's been training for a 5-rounder. He's fought in Brandon Royval, who up until, I don't know, a month ago was probably next in line to get another shot at the title. Now everything has changed with, Joshua Van in there. But I think this is a good fight. I just don't see how it could favor Park at all. The short notice, the 5-rounder against a better grappler, probably a faster guy. I think it's just, all signs point to Taira here. I don't think he gets him out of there. I think it goes to decision. Tends to happen at this weight class. But I think we see a master class and possibly, the next guy who gets a shot after Joshua Van for the belt.
Yeah, and I'm going to make it a clean sweep for the night for the Octagon guys here, and I'm going to also side with Tatsuro Taira. Look at us, guys. We're all on the same picks 2 weeks in a row. That can't go wrong, right? But
Genius.
yeah, I think Tatsuro Taira will hold the advantage almost everywhere this fight can go. I know Hyun Sung Park does have good boxing, like you touched on there, Luke, but he also does get hit, and he has been knocked down by some lower level competition. And what really kind of sold this one for me was the fact that Hyun Sung Park, being one of those road to the UFC guys, he really was very close to losing his road to the UFC championship there. I forget who exactly he was fighting in that fight, but he was losing the fight going into the 3rd round, and then he was able to get the back of his opponent and sink in a rear naked choke, find his win. And since then, I really wasn't too high on Hyun Sung Park. He then went on to fight Shannon Ross, who you really
Shannon Ross has a win in the UFC.
Exactly. It's a very low-level competition fighter. So there, I didn't even really pick up that much more confidence here in Hyun Sung Park. But he did prove me wrong when he went and fought Carlos Hernandez not very long ago at the UFC Apex. He picked up the submission win as well there by rear naked choke. Proved me wrong, but I'm just not the highest on Hyun Sung Park, whereas Tatsuro Taira, I am. I think Tatsuro Taira is a very formidable fighter. I think Tatsuro Taira deserves to be towards the top of this division and in that championship caliber type conversation. I think he is one of the best fighters in that division. He's very slick on the feet. His grappling is pretty wicked. We saw that TKO win against Alex Perez, which had to have been about a year ago at this point, where he got his back kind of like swept out the leg and just ended the fight there. It was kind of weird. I know, Ryan, you were on submission on that fight, so you were kind of ticked off about how that one was scored.
Popped his knee doing something on purpose with a body triangle. So I looked like a submission in my book, but yeah, they ruled it a knockout.
Yeah, but I do see Tatsuro Taira holding the big advantage here in the grappling. I think his wrestling is kind of next level for this division. And with that being said, I will also side with Tatsuro Taira. And now that we're through the main card here, boys, I don't know if either of you have something else you want to touch on. But if not, we'll we'll call it here. Everyone, best of luck come Saturday night. If you're still tuning in, please drop, a sub, like on the video. It's all greatly appreciated, and we will be back soon to talk some more UFC. So thank you all for tuning in.
Peace.
Peace.